Hi, my name is Eric Skoglund. I'm the speech and debate coach at Olathe Northwest High School in Kansas, and I am also the 6A classification representative from the Kansas Speech Communication Association to the KSHSAA. In this video, I'm going to go through two different pieces of information. One, I'm going to talk you through how a proposal becomes a rule change in our speech and drama manual. And then I'm also going to summarize the changes that we have passed at the last executive board meeting to go into effect for the 2021-22 season. So first of all, it's important to understand that there are a lot of different pieces from KSHSAA that dictate how our activity functions. The one you probably interact with the most is the Debate, Speech, and Drama Manual. This is where most of our rules are. The rules that govern all of our invitational, regional, and state tournaments, unless you opt out of some of these rules with your invitation. The rules about how events are contested. The requirements on judges, how we tab these tournaments. But there are some important things that are not in the manual and are instead in the KSHSAA handbook. I'm not going to be talking today about how we amend the handbook. The most common handbook rule that is discussed when we are talking about debate, speech, and drama is the 500-mile rule. That is not something that is within our domain to be able to change using this process. You would have to work with a different set of processes to get the handbook amended if you were interested in going that route. So basically, there's a 5-step process from beginning to end as to how something goes from a conversation in a tab room somewhere out to being text in the next year's manual. So I'm going to kind of go through each of these steps, but basically we begin as a proposal for change to the classification representatives, and it ends up as an incorporated change in text in the manual. Your classification representatives, this is a list as of May 2021, so depending on how far into the future you're watching this video, some or all of these names may have changed, but this is your current slate of representatives. Now, even though our committee gets one person from each classification, you shouldn't feel like you only should go to the classification rep that matches your classification. If you have a relationship with someone else on this list that's not your classification, or if you just happen to be at a tournament with them, you can certainly chat with any of us, and we would be happy to sort of put your idea on the radar. The first step in getting anything to change in the manual is to make a proposal for a change, to let your classification or someone's classification rep know that there is an idea that you have that you'd like to have in the rules. So this can come in a lot of ways from varying levels of formality. You could just have a conversation with your class rep while you're at a tournament. You could send an email. We also, in many of our surveys, we include a comment section where you could add information about things you'd like to see us look at and consider for future surveys. Any of those work really well. Now, I will say the biggest thing that causes a proposal to sort of die between here and the next step is when that proposal is not really thorough enough for us to take action on it. So more detail is always better, especially if you're proposing a fairly complex change. It's helpful if we understand a bit of the rationale that you and other coaches might have for causing this change to happen. And it's also important to think about how other rules would be impacted. As an example of this, if you're proposing increasing the number of entries that some folks get at the state speech tournament, does that change how we need to consider the judges that we're going to bring, that sort of thing. Now, our classification representatives are always collecting these ideas. We meet usually twice a year. In a normal year, we meet in person and once in the fall, which is typically connected to the KSCA conference, and then one other time in the spring where we are all able to try and find a day to get together. And the most important thing that we do at that meeting is we take those ideas that have been brought to us and we translate them into survey items where we have good specific language on the survey that we're putting out and the rationale that connects to it. And like I said already, there are a few reasons why an idea might not survive from the conversation stage to the survey stage, but the most common causes are a lack of detail or a need to consider some of the unintended consequences of a potential rule. After we meet, we send out a survey to the entire state's coaches, and we seek as much feedback as possible on all of those different rule proposals. Generally speaking, proposals have to meet a minimum threshold of 70% in order for KSHSAA to consider them as being supported by our community. We also do disaggregate that survey data by classification so that we make sure that we're not looking at a proposal that, you know, the 6A and 5A folks really want, but the smaller classifications very much do not. That would potentially cause us to reconsider or rework rather than going straight to a new proposal. But any proposal that meets that 70% threshold and is not roundly shot down by one or more classifications then is put into a formal proposal to the KSHSAA Executive Board. That group meets regularly from KSHSAA's perspective, and we can always schedule time at their meetings. Usually there are representatives from KSCA present to make that presentation and then to answer questions from the KSHSAA Executive Board, because oftentimes the members of the board have varying levels of understanding of our activity, and so they will ask us for a lot of questions, and then their choices as far as the action they can take is to approve all, some, or none of our proposals. Finally, anything that is approved by the executive board turns into text in the manual for future years, and that is generally within the domain of our KSHSAA staff, who is right now Craig Monteifel, and he will often ask for assistance from the KSCA classification reps in order to make that language come together. And then, as you've probably seen in the manual, anytime we add new language, that language is highlighted in reverse colors so that it stands out, and you are always aware of what rules are new for the coming school year. So what are you going to see new in the manual for 2021 and 2022? There were a number of things on last spring's survey, and everything that was surveyed did pass, so they are going to turn into new rules in our activities. So a couple of rules that impact both debate and speech and drama. First, we are moving to more of a model of in-person competition, with the idea, though, that virtual competition might still have a place in our activity, not just this year, but moving forward the rest of the way. The caveat with a virtual competition is that if you host a virtual competition, it does not count as hosting an in-person competition. So your students would not yet get the privilege of having 8 competitions. That rule may be re-examined as we see how we're coming out of the pandemic in the fall. It may be that we need to propose an extension of the bigger set of virtual rule changes that we did in the fall of 2020. The other rule change that we did for both activities is that a student who is competing in an event will not have their immediate family in the judge pool for that event. So in debate, what that means is that in the 2-speaker tournament, if you needed to bring that judge that is related to a competitor, you would need to swap them with a different classification or swap them with a judge that's judging the opposite tournament, you know, considering 4 versus 2-speaker. In speech and drama, it's a little bit easier. You would just say that that judge can, of course, be brought by the school, but they would just be prevented from judging the couple of events where that student is competing. Some other rules impacting debate. The computer tabulation option has passed for the 2-speaker state tournament, so a classification may now vote to use a different set of tabulation rules and have that be run rather than on paper cards by a digital system such as the one we've sort of grown to use right now, which is tabroom.com. We have also adopted some language explaining when a judge ought not judge a specific round, when they should consider themselves conflicted from that round. We have changed the paper paradigm forms to a requirement that judges have an electronic paradigm, and that could come either in the form of a paradigm on a site like tabroom.com or in a Google form that sort of mirrors what was on the old paper forms. And finally, probably the one that most strongly will impact the way we do business is that now at the state tournaments and regional tournaments, internet use will be permitted in a policy debate if the host is able to offer access to a guest wireless network. Speech and drama did not see as many changes passed for the coming school year. One change is that now, to align with the debate number and continue basically the temporary rule that was put in place for our pandemic competition in spring of 21, the minimum number of schools required for an invitational to count for state qualification is now 5. And the same internet use provision that we passed for policy debate will also be passed for extemp prep and for Lincoln Douglas debate, again subject to the caveat that the host needs to be able to offer access to a guest wireless network in order for that internet use to be granted at the tournament. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a better idea of how proposals become rules in the first place, and some initial idea of what's coming down the pipe for us in 21-22. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all back in person, and we will see you all out there.